Hello everybody, Joe here. Because I feel slightly pressured in my ways of life on doing things, I wanted to make not one, but two videos. That's right, and they're both lazy tier lists. This one will have some music, because I don't want it to just be me talking and you guys get the sound of silence and me moving in my chair, with the occasional creaks and cracks of my spinal column. So, let us start with the factions. We have a great many factions here today. From Australia to Canada, the Norths and the Souths, to the Kurds, and the Chinese. Let's get started. First, the Australians. C tier. The Australian faction is a semi-decent faction. Their infantry makes up for what their armor lacks in. Their armor has glaring flaws, but I'll get to those in a second. In my earlier video, you heard me point out how the M1A1 was not the greatest tank due to its lack of roof defense systems to help support infantry. It makes up for other things with the infantry having a very decent primary, the AUG. This makes up for it and makes it a very decent faction in terms of infantry gameplay. When it's infantry v infantry, the Aussies are hard-pressed to lose due to their diverse factions, group, and utilitarianism that they possess. Compared to other factions, which are hard-pressed into certain roles and gear sets, the Australians are very well-rounded and are very neat. Might as well move them up to B tier for niceness. D tier, the Canadians. The Canadians have one goal: not die. The Canadian infantry is not supported by a decent armor set. This is because the Canadian infantry are stuck with the C7, C8, C9, and C6. The C7 and C8 are their primary service weapons in use. The C7 is a long rifle variant of the C8. Due to the squad's new, I'm gonna call them terrible decisions in life, the Canadians are now one of the worst factions to play as. In fact, playing as any of these factions except the Rebels is kind of a shit idea. Because for some reason the Rebels barely suffer any visual suppression. Anyways, the Canadian infantry lacks, and the armor lacks. Coupled with some of the worst vehicles in the game, the M113A1, or I think it was called. Basically, the boxcar APC. Actually, I think it was literally just the M113. Basically, the M113, aka the box APC from Vietnam, sucks some type of terribleness, because it literally will drift and slide like Kobe Bryant is playing basketball with you. And trust me, it's not a fun time. It's the worst time.
Challenge everything.
Jesus Christ, I just want to listen to Battlefield music while I do this because of... Alright. Anyway. But where was I saying? Oh yes, they suck. In some maps, even, the Coyote is your main armored vehicle. Why is an APC acting as our main armor when we have the Leopards? The Canadians have Leopards. They do. I guess they just wanted to say fuck Canada and just slam dunk them into the garbage where they belong, I guess. The British, A tier. They have a strong complement of vehicles that they are given. Any map you see the British on, they have a strong armor basis, and their infantry, when played right, can lead them into very successful situations that are very hard pressed for them to lose. Coupled with the L96 variants of weapons, they come out on top more often than not. With the new suppression update though, I haven't played it because that update made me vomit. They're very hard-pressed to lose in their fights. As long as you play smart, they are very decent at their job. And you'll be hard-pressed to find a faction as good as them, if not better. However, in this tier list, there's two factions that rise and surpass them. The Insurgency. The Insurgent forces, otherwise known as Discount Iraq, have a unique advantage. What do I call that unique advantage, you say? Well, they have technicals. Technicals in Squad are the best vehicles in the game, in some regards. You might say, but Joe, they have all the other factions have tow missiles. They have tanks that fire 105 rounds or more. They have vehicles that can deal the pain. They have helicopters. They have everything that this faction doesn't. So what makes them so worthy of this S tier status, this coveted goal? The technical. A technical vehicle, and by any terms, is basically a truck with an improvised weapon system mounted in it. The advantages granted by this are very high mobility, low durability. That high mobility, on the other hand, grants it the unique prestige of being amongst the foremost threats on the battlefield. A smart vehicle crew in a technical is worth their weight in gold compared to a tanker crew. The tank crew, yes, they can snipe from afar and do damage, but when the M113 is something the Canadians have, it's a very easy bar to clear in terms of good tank crews. A technical crew can be basically wheat toast in the sense of brain capacity. And I'll tell you something. Having a terrible driver will not impair the technical as much. A good gunner, a good driver, a good commander is what rounds it out. Having a bad driver does take it down. Having a bad gunner takes it down. Having any bad person in a technical would drain any vehicle down. Having a bad crew in anything would make it worse. But the technical, that good crew, makes a difference. That good crew basically changes tides. You might go, but what about the discs? They have an unarmored back that allows them to get shot. As I can recall, there was an armored variant with the BTR turret. That thing is a killer. It's much slower, but has an armored box. There are also vehicles that are armored. Using these armored turrets, they are basically the equivalent of gods. Using the armored vehicles are making them god tier. The armored vehicles basically just make them go from, hey, we're okay, to, we are going to destroy your entire existence, because now no longer are you able to snipe out the driver. So you go from being able to destroy and disable the technical permanently to, I took out the gunner. Yay. With the new suppression updates too, the technicals go from, oh, it's unarmored, I can easily shoot out the back guy, the turret gunner. Not anymore, but the suppression updates implemented, these guys are basically gods amongst men. And with their infantry having a lesser notice on suppression, with an emphasis on basically mobile warfare, these guys basically turn a battlefield into a killing floor for them. The enemy team will be forced to rely off defensive, hard emplacements that the insurgents typically are a hard place to overwhelm. But wherever these guys show up, usually it's them on the defensive, and they have the tools to make it work. Now, I'm not going to say that it's the worst idea to have these guys. They're not the worst. In fact, I'd wager they're some of the best. I forget who these guys are. think they're the national army of some nation. They're a solid C tier. So, the issue with these guys is their armor is a little bit ass. As with the Russian team as well, these guys support the Russian family of vehicles, the Grads, the T-series of tanks, and the BMPs and BTRs. However, since it's the older variants, they either have larger profiles or worse kits overall. That doesn't mean that they're terrible, it just means that they're not as good. Their infantry also has a universal weapons set. So instead of them all having different guns like the Canadians do, you fucking plebeians, these guys all support the FN-FAL series of weaponry, if I can recall that name correctly. What makes that so great is that the FAL is a devastator of men. It will devastate you if it hits. With the new suppression update though, they are awful. Your visual recoil stammer that you get when firing this baby at somebody, yes, they will be in recoil, way worse than a 5.56 round will make them. But with these guys, you're now shaking worse than a guy who's tweaking out. It's like you just took 90 hits of the puffer, and now you're just flinging your brain out to this next cosmos. You're terrible. These guys right here, the worst. Literally the worst. These guys, I forget who they belong to, but I remember everything they have. So these guys rely off of a fine mix. So these guys are actual insurgents that pop up in certain maps, based mainly Canada. They're supported by the Russians. However, that doesn't mean that their equipment is solely Russian-based. They get access to other vehicles too. This makes them a more diverse playset. So while they do support, just like the National Army, weaker vehicles, their guns are slightly older, but that doesn't make them worse. In fact, it makes them just as deadly, because they actually support off the local weaponry. Now, you might say, so they'd get whatever other factions' main weapons they have. No. They stick with the old tried and trues, M16s, Mosins. They basically are going with, if it can still be shot, it's a serviceable weapon. However, the fact is, unlike the insurgents who are funded by something because they have all these good guns, these guys are funded by nothing. These guys are literally scrounging with like a fine, meaning it's a hodgepodge of weapons. And most of them are good. Most of them are deadly weapons that are efficient and good at their job. Coupled with the fact that most of the time these guys are fighting on a defensive, or they're fighting against something like the Canadians, these guys usually are winning the fight. These guys, the insurgents specialize in hit and run and ambushing. They are basically the insurgents in a forest. The insurgents have to use fast mobile vehicles to make up for their terrain. These guys, they're deadly. Small groups of men can easily destroy the Canadian team. The Canadian team needs to rely off of, typically when it's the Canadians, being as a big, large bubble, covering all their sectors, making sure they don't get surprised. But that's where the insurgents really start shining. These guys shine. They take a grand shining to bubbles of infantry. Planting ambushes, planting traps, doing whatever they can to disrupt that bubble of men and then sweep and overwhelm. While the Canadians have they have to use tactics and overall strategy to win, the insurgency really does rely off of them having a general small group census in mind, and instead of relying off their team to do all the work, they instead rely off small individual combat. This makes it go from squad to individual. Fighting in a single insurgent as a whole team of Canadians That's not a problem. You could take down a squad of these insurgents. But the problem is, what are the traps they're laying? What type of subterfuge have they laid in the works at that point to stop you from getting in? And that's also not complimenting the fact that these guys are powerhouses against other factions too. Whenever these guys show up, they have a generally good set of weapons, equipment, and use case scenarios. To such an extent, I'd say these guys are a definite pick for winning most matches. They're not powerful like the British, but they're not weak like the Nationals. They're just a nice, well-rounded team. The Chinese. Why do I place the Chinese so low? Their weapons are not the greatest. Now you might say, well, the rocket launcher has a rangefinder. Just saying, oh, well, it has a rangefinder is a cop-out on the issue at hand. The issue being... the rockets kinda suck. You only get one of them as a light, and the heavy gets about 2. One of each. Actually, no, it's 3. 2 HE projectiles and 1 AP. This makes it so that the Chinese actually have the worst AT game in the game. They're making up for this with the good old rangefinder, but in my opinion, having a rangefinder on a weapon, How'd I go to there? Alright. Back on track with the music. The Chinese also consist of 2 factions that aren't listed here. That's because the Chinese were rushed out due to ye olde Tencent going, we need our faction, to such an extent that I'd say they're rushed to such that bad of an extent. They are, hands down, only kept from D tier mainly because of that range-finding weapon system they have. That and their vehicles aren't the worst compared to Canada. I'm looking at you, Canada, you terrible faction, you. Anyways, the Chinese mainland faction typically consists of normal troops, okay tanks. Basically, when these guys fight, it usually results in them losing. Their weapons are not the greatest, and their abilities of use are also not the greatest. Now you might say this makes sense, until you realize they lack a lot of the things the other factions have. Their LMG team is kind of a terrible pick. Don't pick the LMG. It's terrible. It lacks in a lot of regards. Whereas the light machine gun for every other faction is a much better solid choice. In fact, the Canadians even have a better LMG. And that's a hard... well, that's a hard bar to clear, the LMG section. But if I gave the D tier Canadians something above, like, C, that'd be discrediting everybody in C and below. Next up is the Russians. Obvious B tier pick. They're good, middle of the ground. Their weapons are okay to good. And their vehicles are good. They are a very solid choice and a very solid pick. They're not very standout in many regards, but what they have is what they have, and it's very decent at what it does. Unlike our insurgency friends, these guys have helicopters. The helicopters are okay, but unlike the other factions where it's smaller, the Mi-8, pretty bulky boy. You come against an Mi-8, it's a very large silhouetted helicopter compared to the Black Hawk. That silhouette profile gives it away more times than not, and leads it to getting shot down more times than not. Now you could say, Well, Joe, the Canadians had the Huey. That's a smaller profile even than the M8, the Blackhawk, the MH60. To that I say, okay, what about the rest of their kit? You old Marines. The Marines are basically the Americans with older kit. The United States Marines were made as a homage to the invasion of Iraq force. That means they bring everything that they had in Iraq except for the Striker MGS system. So no 105 cannon on your vehicle and tipping over the second you shoot it sideways. The advantages are the Marines come with a great host of vehicles, from LAVs and other Vics of that same nature, like Strikers and such, to the M1A2 Abrams. Now you might say, Joe, why do they come with the M1A2? Simple. They actually pop up on maps that are landlocked, so the Navy doesn't come out as much to play. With that being said, though, they're a very solid pick, and only the reason they're getting the B-tier treatment is because of this update. The suppression update has neutered factions. It's basically made Squad damn near unplayable from its previous state. And I know I say, oh, Joe, the suppression update isn't that bad, you just need to get good. It's terrible! Your suppression rates basically make a common soldier turn into a goddamn coward. A piss boy. You basically go from, oh yes, I'm a confident soldier, before where, you know, other games when you're getting shot at, your suppression is annoying, but it's manageable, like a soldier would know how to do. They undergo stress management, they undergo combat scenarios, training, all these things to hone that fighting ability and experience. If anything, with the current suppression rates, I'd say the insurgency should actually be the worst off. They're local militiamen. Sure, they had that conviction to die, but getting shot at would still scare the fucking piss out of them. Because they don't have the mental hardening of a standard soldier. They don't have the training. Standard soldiers, if they were properly depicted in this, yes, I know, oh, Joe, you're running around with 90 pounds of kit, how are you running for eternity? Yes, fine, you're getting at that. But when we're having suppression so aggressive that you're basically turning your guy into a cerebral palsy victim, that's not suppression anymore. That's just bullying by proximity. Now, if it was, say, I get shot at by a 50 cal, okay, understandable. That's a 50 BMG round coming straight at my goddamn guy. Understandable that he wants to get the hell out of the way. But a 5.56 just makes a small whiz, a small crack. That crack and whiz, understandable, you don't want to get hit by it. But the first round of gunfire should take a second. And your character should get adrenaline or something, you know, the body's natural fight or flight response, and your goddamn gun sway should only start really kicking in when you're really under fire and when that flight response is really kicking in. Against a single guy, that fire-flight is screaming fight. And it's screaming hard. But against, like, a couple dudes, like one or two, and you have the advantage on them and you just dropped one, you're gonna be feeling pretty fucking pumped and going, yeah, I got these fuckers. These fuckers are mine. Yeah, excuse the language, YouTube. I don't care. I'm at, like, the 24-minute mark. I'm gonna swear if I want to. But basically, with the new suppression update, everybody's a pansy ass. There's no sugarcoating it. It's understandable with heavy caliber weapons. You want to get the hell out of the way of those things. You want to get in cover. But you're making these guys seem like wimps, chumps even, schnooks. All because of a single bullet from a fucking pistol caliber, and these guys are running to the hills screaming for mommy. It's basically painted these soldiers out to be the buffest, strongest men on earth, but the second the bullets start flying, they're fucking out of there. Oh yeah, Americans go here. They're basically the same as Marines, but have more up-to-date kit. That's my rant for that. Alright, next tier list. Fuck. Alright. Fuck, I gotta remember these maps. Ahem. C tier. F tier. Alright, let's explain Eurivica. Got removed from the map list. Why? It's actually terrible. Talil Outskirts. It should be removed from the map list. Why? It's too goddamn open. To such an extent that tank snipers are a fucking thing. I'm sorry, but when I play a map in a desert, I highly hope I'm not getting sniped out by a T-62 camping halfway across the map, and my tank teammate is doing the goddamn same thing, because God for fucking bid, we have fun. Samari. That's a B tier. Samari has a very nice mixture of cover, open engagements, and close quarters engagements. It's what a map should strive to be. A mix of close and open quarters engagements and fighting. Narva. C tier. Better than Yurvika, because I forget what Yurvika is in it. Eurivica. Because nobody fucking plays that map, man. No one played it. It's not the greatest. Anyway, Scorpo! Wait, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, Narva. I'd like to give Narva more than a C tier, but the great map developers in the sky forgot one good thing when copying map assets, and that is, when you copy a map asset, you also copy its flaws and defects. So there's a lot of high-rise buildings, and with those high-rise buildings comes the unique and annoying thing called building clearing. So you go from simply crossing the river to... Now the river crossing has turned into a shitfest because the entire apartment building system in front of you is now turned into a goddamn hornet's nest of infantry activity. As they keep shooting down at you, your men are pushing up into it, and yeah, everything's gone to shit. That's the main problem with Narva, is both the river that kind of runs in it, and the fact that every building turns into a hellhole to push through. Scorpo, I played it once, it was okay. Why do I call Scorpo only okay? That's because I played as the VDV fighting against insurgents. Now, the VDV ain't the worst, but they ain't packing a lot of good armor. That's for goddamn sure. It gets B tier Scorpo because if it was better, it would be placed higher. But with that whole upper portion here, you can kind of see it. Usually a point spawns there. It turns into a slaughter. It's a death sentence up there. The fact is, people have to push in from the bottom. Pushing in from the bottom is actually hell. Now, you spawn on this side, it's not the worst because, yeah, they can defend here, but this is such a long goddamn stretch, it's a fucking death march. If that point spawns up here, just admit defeat. Just type in surrender somehow. Mutaha. Mutaha is a D tier map. I'm not going to explain why. You know if you know. Goose Bay. Goose Bay blows. Number one issue. The squad developers, in their haste to make a Canada update, forgot to think about something real quick here. And that is, Canada's a winter nation. So, what would make sense for Canadians to have as a camouflage? Would it be Cadpat, Woodland Green? Yes, that makes sense in maps where luscious green is all around. Deserts, they have Cadpat Arid. Makes sense, they're in a desert. So what do they wield in a snowy landscape? Do they use the winter camouflage that, well, you might think, well, they don't have a Cadpat winter. They do have forms of winter camo that they do use. They don't use it in this game. And it shows on Goose Bay. And it shows. Everybody keeps silhouetted against the goddamn snow that's in the ground. And the only thing that stops you from getting silhouetted is by being next to the rocks and the trees. Maybe then something's gonna stick out on you because guess what? You're wearing green on white. It's a fucking blank canvas out there, buddy, and you picked to stick out on that canvas. You picked the brights on the goddamn canvas. Estia. Small map, it's pretty good. Mainly open though, but it's still pretty good. Belaya. I have a love-hate relationship with this map. Why hasn't it downgraded worse in my opinion? The fact that the point doesn't spawn in the underground complex too often. If it did, I would have this map sent down to the F tier, because fighting through that underground complex when it's a buildable area is hell. It's a fucking slog in there. And pushing through it normally is a slog, but it's super fob, because guess what? Every nook and cranny of that place will be either gunned, manned, or mined. And every time you're pushing through there, it's death after death after death after death. Every time you're pushing in there, it's another hail of bullets or death waiting for you. Whether it be via landmine or tow missile gunner having a fucking off day, deciding to shoot some infantry with the tow missile. The underground complex in Belaya sets it apart as a hellscape of a map. Otherwise, the rest of the map is perfectly fine with a nice mixture of long-range engagements in fields and urbanish combat. But the underground complex just makes it hell. Albastra is okay. I don't have any complaints on it. Lashkar, okay. Logar, it's kind of bad. Meh. Kokan, it's honestly on the worser side of things, honestly. Kohat, same thing. Pretty sure most of these maps have been removed from the map pool because they just look like fucking... Yeah, see, Kamdesh. Kamdesh, yet again, another okay map in my opinion. But, meh. Gorodok. Honestly, I haven't played the map too much, but it was okay. The major river in the middle really makes it a little more annoying, but it's not the worst map. I super fobbed on this map. It was fine. Fool's Road. It's okay. Felucia. There's a reason I go around making the joke, you're fighting in Felucia, motherfucker. Welcome to Felucia Heights. That's because Felucia, yes, it does map asset copying, but unlike Narva, where it has the issue of it not sticking to its guns and trying to diversify with open range combat, Felucia sticks to its guns, and most, or if not the whole map you're fighting in, is urbanized combat. Vehicles in this map are a hell to be in. You don't want to be in a Vic. Infantry have the run of the place. The few places where Vics are useful are at the ends of the map. Tanks are relegated to sniper duty, because the second they go into that city, it's a kill nest for them. They'll die instantly, basically. It's because the infantry have such a run of the city that it's hard to establish a front line even, is what I'd like to call it. You'll clear out one street, and then as you're moving to the next, the enemy removes into the previous street and moves behind you. It's basically a sentence of hell. You'll have a good time on the map if you enjoy urban combat. The new update makes it worse, but still, it's a fun homage. And compared to other maps, Felucia actually makes up for a lot of its faults. Its major downfall, and unbecoming in my opinion, is the 3-bridge system. The attacking faction will always have to use the 3 bridges to get across. The problem is, the 3 bridges are always, if not, outside the protection range that admins like to make for servers. So some servers like to say 100 for mining, some like to say 300. Any way you shake it, Felucia's bridges are always out of range of the main spawn for that mine protection. Without that mine protection, it's a wrap. The Felucia bridges become a suicide nest where you have to send the infantry across the river to make any dents. And even then, they're under heavy fire from buildings. The vehicles are hard pressed to keep pressing down because the vehicles are also under fire themselves by either the enemy's vehicles or emplacements in rocket fire from the enemy. Felucia, in my opinion, goes to show you the hell that modern warfare can be in an urban setting. Chora is okay. Manic 5. That map, unlike Goose Bay, which is a Canadian map as well as Manic 5, Manic 5 is a Canadian map that does it right. Whether you're playing against the Russians or the Insurgents, the Canadians have home field advantage. And it shows. It has some rivers in it that make it a little harder to get through, but it's mainly forested and allows them to have a run of the place that's unseen. With them having the run of the place, basically, they can sneak around and do things that you thought were a pain to do. With their amphibious vehicles being able to quickly cross the rivers without needing bridges, and with their infantry being okay enough to stand up in a fight, but not the best, Manic 5 goes from okay for the Russians to please mom get me out of Afghanistan 2 Green Edition. The thing about Manic 5, though, in my humblest of opinions, is the dam. It's not the greatest. The dam serves as the secondary bridge that's not the land bridge down in the middle of the map. The dam bridge is a bottleneck. It's a death neck is what it is, actually. I have rephrased bottleneck into death neck in this sense, because you see how it starts wide and ends small. That's because enemy infantry, either on either side, have to either condense or already condensed coming in. And a single tow gunner on either side, woo, bang, that first vehicle's dead in the water. Or dead. With it dead in the water, Vic clogging the way, the infantry basically have to clamber around it and get over it. And then it just turns into a simple matter of lighting them up with infantry fire. You can deploy smokes, but because it's such a bottleneck, those smokes don't do anything for cover. Because it's simply put, a death neck. It's a death pit of a bottleneck that'll basically just shred any infantry and forces them to take the lower paths, which, since it's in the woods too, it's a pain to move through. Manic 5 is the definition of you take a point, you ain't losing that point. And if you take a point that's in the wooded areas, that's not the dam, you're hard pressed to keep it. Basically, Manic 5 goes to show you that in a forest, the trees speak. It's a hell that they speak of. And last map, Operation First Light. Yet again, another good map. Instead of trying to be annoying with its gimmicks, it's just a simple desert map. Has high hills, high terrain, keeps you from being instantly sniped, but does its job. Anyways, everybody, that has been my my 2 tier lists of the day. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all again in the next video. Otherwise, bye!